Welcome. This is James Corbett of the Corbett Report with your EyeOpener report for BoilingFrogsPost.com. Pipeline politics have entered the North American consciousness over the last several months, with the proposed Keystone Pipeline connecting the Alberta Oil Sands to the United States becoming a contentious political issue, sparking a storm of protest from a concerned population. Much less firmly implanted in the North American consciousness, however, are a series of pipeline projects both proposed and under construction that are set to change the face of Central Asia and to rewire the political relations of Eurasia as a whole. The political implications of these projects are enormous, if underappreciated, and the potential economic rewards for the players involved are likewise enormous, a fact certainly not lost on the players involved in the Nord Stream pipeline, a pipe connecting Germany directly to Russian gas reserves, which was inaugurated earlier this week.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I get your help now with the countdown? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The first stage of the Nord Stream pipeline was launched on Tuesday. The symbolic tap of gas pipeline was turned on by leaders of the participating states: Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Prime Ministers of the Netherlands and France, Mark Rutte and François Fillon. The Russian president said ahead of the opening ceremony that the project's goals were purely economic. This project pursues purely pragmatic and economic goals. We can say for sure that the new pipeline will be among the most advanced in its sphere, especially as far as environmental protection is concerned.
As in the German-Russian example, pipelines and the lucrative economic benefits they offer have a unique ability to smooth over otherwise bumpy political relations. This is evident in the proposed Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline that would see longtime political enemies Pakistan and India connected to the same pipe supplied by the largest natural gas field in the world, the South Pars field in the Persian Gulf. In the same way, many countries are wary of pipelines that might increase their energy dependence on a single source. Europeans uncomfortable with growing energy dependence on Russia, for example, are eager to proceed with the Nabucco pipeline, a project that would see Iraqi, Azerbaijani, and Turkmenistani gas supplied to Europe via Turkey. Seen not just as an economic investment, but a strategic security asset, the pipeline would reduce Europe's reliance on gas from Moscow and help supply Europe's growing needs for gas, which is expected to rise over 50% in the next 20 years. The project is backed by the EU and the US.
But nothing demonstrates the EU's determination to diversify its energy supplies more clearly than the Nabucco pipeline. This is a pipeline taking gas from the Caucasus through Turkey and into the EU, ending in Austria. Nabucco has won strong support from the EU, and for good reason, as Nabucco Managing Director Reinhard Mischek explains.
Europe will need more gas in future, that's definitely the case. In addition to that, Nabucco delivers a perfect opportunity to diversify the sources on the one hand with Central Asia and Middle East, and also to diversify the transportation routes.
The Nabucco project has been on the drawing board since 2002, however, and the project consortium director just announced yesterday that they will not even have a final investment decision until early 2013. Expected to cost several billion euro, it still has yet to secure the participation of Azerbaijan and other key players who can help supply the pipe's proposed capacity of 31 billion cubic meters per year. The project has major competition from Moscow, however, in the form of South Stream, the southern gas corridor mirror of the recently opened North Stream project. And like the North Stream, South Stream is a project of Gazprom, the Russian government-controlled pipeline corporation. As noted journalist, author, and pipeline pundit Pepe Escobar noted in a conversation earlier this month, the Russians have the political and economic upper hand over the Europeans in this high-stakes game of resource management.
Russia came up with a brilliant idea of building two different pipelines to sell gas to Europe. The Nord Stream and the South Stream. The South Stream is competing with Nabucco. Nabucco is the preferred European American option, and South Stream is the Russian option. But it's cheaper and can be built in record time, unlike Nabucco, which I didn't even know where the money is coming from, right? And Nord Stream was already built in record time, respecting a lot of very complex ecological regulations because it goes through the Baltic. And the Baltic states, they said, no, protect the ecology, otherwise don't even think about it. And the Russians did it. It didn't cost, okay, it cost a fortune. It cost at least $15 billion, the last number that we have, maybe more. But this politically, it was very clever because there was one guy who pulled that off, and his name is Vladimir Putin. And why? Because he dealt directly with heads of government. In the case of Germany, Putin dealt with Gerhard Schröder when he was still prime minister. And no wonder that Gerhard Schröder is one of the major shareholders of the consortium that operates Nord Stream. And with South Stream, Putin dealt directly with Berlusconi until virtually yesterday. And that's why South Stream, in terms of supplying South Europe, is on a much better stage than Nabucco. Because Nabucco is a mess. Even governments don't agree. But South Stream, because the Russians dealt directly with governments, and government of Hungary as well, they offered a lot of stuff, building plants, you name it. So Putin, the Putin strategy, when you look at it, is absolutely brilliant. Because not only he cornered most of the European market, north and south. To give an idea, Gazprom now supplies 25% of Europe's gas. And they plan to get to 30% in 3 or 4 years. That's amazing, you know. So this means that, yes, Europe is dependent on Russian gas, but because the Russians knew how to negotiate. And if you go to Brussels and you talk to those bureaucrats in Brussels, they're always complaining that the Russians are tough negotiators. No, they're good negotiators.
As the US and Europe are all too aware, the growing leverage that these pipelines give to Russia and their partners in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, including gas-rich Turkmenistan, make for an Eastern Bloc that could potentially pose an economic and even a military threat to NATO hegemony over the pivotal Eurasian region. As posited by a growing number of pundits including William Engdahl, the author of A Century of War, Anglo-American Politics and the New World Order, this threat has created a situation of pipeline warfare whereby Western interests are served by covertly destabilizing the SCO partners in the region in order to justify an increased NATO presence. Earlier this week I had the chance to talk to Engdahl about this covert military tension and the ultimate endgame of Western interests in Eurasia.
There's a hidden war going on, the pipeline wars, as Pepe and I have called it over time, between U.S.-backed or Anglo-American energy interests, oil and gas interests, and essentially the Russian. And there's a counter project that was put on the table in Brussels in 2002. Interestingly enough, called Nabucco. It's named after a Verdi opera about the freeing of the Hebrew people from Egypt. But the Nabucco project was deliberately proposed, consciously proposed, as an alternative to the Russian South Stream project. The only problem with Nabucco is they don't have a source for the natural gas locked up. Gazprom does, but not Nabucco. And it would cost something like 4 times, at least double what the South Stream project is estimated to cost. And by estimates of people in the Nabucco consortium, it would probably end up costing 4 times what the initial estimates were. So the Nabucco alternative, which Washington has backed virulently since 2002, they brought it into being. The Nabucco project is, at this point, looking like it's dead in the water before it gets started. So that leaves all sorts of nastiness, such as creating destabilizations in the Shanghai Cooperation countries, the STANs, as Pepe calls them, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and trying to create as much political disruption, as much chaos to justify building up the NATO presence in Afghanistan. I maintain that the only reason that Nobel Peace Prize President Barack Obama upped the ante in Afghanistan shortly on being announced as a Nobel Peace winner was to create a massive military basing directly at the heart of the Shanghai Eurasian landmass in order to target both China and Russia simultaneously. And the 17-some permanent military bases that have been created in Afghanistan, according to reliable reports, under the Bush administration and refortified by the Obama policy, those are not designed to go after Taliban opium growers or tribal chiefs. In fact, the reports are that the Pentagon aircraft flying through Manas Air Base in Kyrgyzstan has been carrying out shipments of opium and heroin into the Russian drug market, protected and sealed by military protection in Manas. If those reports are true or not, we'll have to leave that to first-hand investigations, but the Russians have certainly made accusations that the role of the U.S. in Afghanistan, the role now of NATO troops in Afghanistan, seems to be to protect the secure supply lines of the opium harvest of Afghanistan, the world's largest. Well, the other purpose for being there is to create these bases, most of them air bases, not to bomb Taliban. After all, what is Taliban in Afghanistan? Afghanistan is trying to get rid of occupying powers that have been on its with a boot on their throat for 30 years. They're sick of war and being occupied. The Afghanis I know, at least, and these include monarchists as well as normal Afghanis. So the military presence in Afghanistan of the U.S. is directed against the growing independence of Eurasia, the Shanghai Cooperation countries. Chevron has the largest oil project in Kazakhstan, one of the key countries of the SCO. Chevron is a company that has a dual agenda. One is an oil company, an energy company, and the other as an integral linked part of the American foreign policy agenda. It's geopolitics pure, as Condoleezza Rice can testify. She was on the board of Chevron before she became Secretary of State or security advisor to Bush. So there's an incredibly intense series of machinations by NATO, ultimately by Washington, to try to sabotage or weaken the growing interdependence. It goes back to one of my favorite quotes from dear Zbigniew Brzezinski, who certainly is a man who knows how the game is played in the U.S. politics. And he said in his 1997 book, The Grand Chess Game, about future U.S. policy toward Eurasia, he said the only space on the globe that could be a potential counter to American sole supremacy, and that's important for Brzezinski and the American elites around David Rockefeller and others, is Eurasia. Eurasia has the population necessary, they have the educated workforce, the scientific manpower, the raw materials, the technological base, everything to be a flourishing, independent economic space and challenge American sole hegemony over the world. Well, what Brzezinski doesn't say is American foreign policy since the end of the Cold War has been dedicated to making sure that doesn't happen.